G'day legends, Blake here with another video, and today I'm in the lab with Paul at Reservoir Aquatics. So thanks first for having me. So today I'm excited to learn all about tissue culture plants, how they're made, how they work, and hopefully it'll help us all to have a bit more success with this sort of stuff.
Yep, okay.
So run me through it. How did this come to be? How did you find all this stuff?
Well, I got talked into doing a tissue culture course back in 2008.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of success back then with HC Cuba.
Yeah, nice.
That was when virtually no one was doing tissue culture aquarium plants other than Tropica were doing multiplications. And I had some success with it, and it's just something I've been working on ever since. I got the factory here in late 2019 and started building the lab.
So Paul, first of all, if people have never come across tissue cultures before, what's the story behind it really?
Well, the story behind it is basically no snails, no algae, no pesticides, extremely good value for money. You get a lot of plants in the container, so you're getting very, very good value for money. They're grown in sterile, controlled, optimal conditions, so you're getting a strong, healthy plant.
Absolutely.
So they're basically your main selling points. Your Storagene repens, there's lots and lots of.
Yeah, you could do a massive foreground of an aquarium with that.
Exactly, or your HC Cuba, same thing. By the time you sit and divide that up into some little clumps and plant it in your substrate, you get a lot of plant. Similar things here, your Rotala butterfly. By the time you sit and divide that up, there's a whole lot of clumps there of Rotala.
That's right.
So you're getting a lot of value for what you're paying. That's Crypt Wentii Brown. The amount of plant you've got in there.
Oh, absolutely.
For some people, it's probably too much, but yeah. If you want to establish, if you're doing a larger tank and you want to plant some Wentii or whatever, plant some crypts out, yeah, you end up with a very, very good supply of what you're paying for.
Yeah, absolutely. You probably get like 50 or 60 plantlets from one pot. So even though it's quite a compact little area, which is also pretty effective for shipping, like you can get a lot in a box if you get it shipped. You get a lot of bang for your buck, especially things like stem plants, like the Rotala butterfly.
Yeah.
You're not having to buy a big long stem, which is likely to melt back anyway. You get a nice compact piece that you can put in the substrate, and it's not going to float everywhere before it takes root, which I've definitely had a lot of issues trying to plant stems.
Yeah, exactly. The feedback I get on things like my Rotala Blood Red and things like that people have gone, oh, I've planted out in the aquarium and a week later it's grown an inch or 2 inches and things like that, depending on their conditions.
Yeah, you do have some really exciting species of plants too. I saw it online and a few times. You got pink flamingo crypts, Crypt nurii, Nubius white, which is always popular.
The white hasn't been as successful. That one, which is the Pinto.
That looks nice.
The white is a massive issue because obviously it's not producing chlorophyll.
Okay.
Which is the green colouring in a plant.
Yep.
It's going to be it's got a problem with the photosynthesis process. It's not producing chlorophyll.
Right.
It's always going to be a very, very difficult plant to try, whether you're growing it in tissue culture or whether you're growing it in the aquarium. Yeah. I find it's quite an unstable plant.
Yeah.
So I've not had too much success with it, whereas the Nana Pinto seems to multiply and grow fairly well in culture. And that's one I'm working on, and whatever other variegated ones that I can get my hands on that I'll eventually tissue culture.
I have heard that about some of those white ones that actually in the aquarium they're limiting certain nutrients to get them like that. So I wonder.
They're not, to be honest, they're probably, you could call them and say they're not really a healthy plant.
Yeah, exactly.
The more variegation that's in them, the more white that is in a plant, the more unhealthy the plant is, which makes it a lot harder to grow. Get it to photosynthesize enough that it stays alive is very difficult.
True. It's probably a good point. I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, but a lot of times you see people jumping into planter tanks. They get attracted to things that just look different to what they're seeing. There's nothing wrong with a nice green plant, and you're going to have a lot less issues than like, oh, I've never seen purple, but it turns out it's not non-aquatic plant anyway, you know?
Well, so. Yeah, look, you've got all your reds in your rotalas, in your ultrarantheras, and a variety of other red type plants. So you can get a very good contrast of plants between different shades of green through to your reds. So you can always create a nice environment. Your Ultraranthera, your Ultraranthera renickii.
Love that.
It's probably a little hard to see, but it's nice and red.
Yeah, that's a great one.
That will normally, unless it's in very low light, it will stay fairly red. And then if you want some variegation, you go to your Rosifolia, which has got your darker red veins in the leaves. So there's enough variation out there if you want to create contrast and variation in your aquarium to do it. Your Tenalis. Your narrow leaf Tenalis, in the right conditions, it will go a nice reddy brown. So yeah, look, you see it in some of that already, that there's a little bit of reddy brown in them just growing in tissue culture. You put them under the right light and you'll get that. You've got your crypts, obviously your flamingos, you've got your your Anubis, your Affinis metallic reds and things like that. You've got your Bucephalandras. You can get a massive variety of colour and contrast in an aquarium.
Actually, that might be a good question. People might be wondering, because often you do see tissue cultures spruiked by these people that are really good aquascapers, but it can be your first ever plant, and if it's a tissue culture, that will work perfectly fine if you choose the right species.
Correct.
It doesn't have to be a complicated thing. As we said before, it's the same species, so it doesn't. You don't have to be scared by them.
It doesn't. You go your Echinodorus tenalis or your Hylantium tenalis. In either the narrow or the broadleaf is a fairly easy to grow one. Your Styrogene repens is a fairly undemanding plant. Most of your Rotalas, your Rotala green, your Rotala, your blood red. I've got the Macranda green here and the butterfly. They're fairly undemanding plants. One of the new ones that I've just started is the Ludwigia Super Red. And that's one that I've just started by taking some cuttings out of the aquarium and sterilising them and getting them growing. It'll take a little while before that one's up and ready, but that's how it happens. I start growing plants in the aquarium and go, yeah, okay, there's an interest in that plant, so.
A lot of the crypts as well, give them a root tab and they'll be your best friend. Some of them are a bit more difficult than others, but for the most part, a beginner could easily grow a crypt, I think. Yeah,
pretty much, as long as you've got fairly stable water parameters and a nutritious substrate, because crypts and Echinodoruses are bottom feeders. Most stem plants are water column feeders. Just little things for people to know and understand.
So we're here in the actual lab portion.
This is my media preparation area where I actually measure out all the ingredients that go into the media that goes into the containers. Your 0.1 milligram scale for measuring things, so you're getting things very, very accurate, or where you've got to measure very small quantities of things, or things like all your pipettes for measuring out all your plant growth regulators that you're using that you're putting into the media to make the plant either grow leaves or multiply. And my little media dispenser that I use for dispensing the liquid media into the containers. And then in here is the actual sterile transfer room. And containers of media waiting to have plants put into them. The laminar flow cabinet, which is where you do all your transfer work.
Yeah, so you're explaining it a little bit before. It's got because there's so many dust particles and stuff floating around, any of those can really compromise a culture. So
correct, they can cause contamination because there's mold spores floating around in the air. There's all sorts of dust particles, mold spores, germs and bacteria, and all sorts of things floating around in the air. We work in the laminar flow cabinet, which creates a positive pressure sterile environment that I can divide the plants up in there, put them into media without the chance of them getting contaminated. Then once they're all sealed up, they then go back into the grow room to grow. Things with tissue culture, you've almost got to be a cook in making the media. And then when you come in here and you're working in here, you're working with a scalpel and tweezers, so there's a certain level of surgical precision in what you're doing. So you've got to have a variety of different skills to do tissue culture successfully.
Absolutely. I guess nice segue from cooking. We'll have a look at the autoclave because I was interested to talk about that a little bit too. This here basically cooks all of the bacteria off things that you can't sterilize with alcohol, right? So
correct. They use it in hospitals and dental surgeries and all sorts of places like that to sterilize, whether it be instruments or other things, to kill and destroy germs and bacteria.
Yeah, and it does that through pressure and heat, right?
Correct.
So how do you then sterilize the plant itself?
The plant itself, you start out by doing running the plant under tap water. You will then, your next step is using something like bleach or hydrogen peroxide or things like that to surface sterilize the plant. Then hopefully you've sterilised them sufficiently, surface sterilised them sufficiently that you don't get contamination and that you haven't sterilised them too much that you've killed them.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is a massive balancing act. You will get, as I can show you in there where I did the Luigi's Super Red the other week, of the, I think I took about 16 or 18 cuttings, half of them contaminated, the others are growing, and they were all sterilised exactly the same amount.
If people have come across other tissue cultures before, they probably see that some of them have kind of really annoying gel that you got to pick off and it takes forever. But I notice if I can touch some of these, there's actually liquid medium in a lot of yours. So can you run us through, is there any difference? Why have you chosen that and sort of that process there?
Well, following along with what Tropica nurseries in Denmark do, and they are probably one of the biggest aquatic plant nurseries in the world and biggest producer of aquatic plant tissue culture, they've transferred virtually all their plants, other than mosses, to a liquid media. The advantages of the liquid media, plants grow faster in it. From feedback I'm getting, they transition better to the aquarium because they're not growing in a semi-immersed environment. They're growing in a submersed environment, in a liquid media, which is basically water, some sugar and nutrients. In tissue culture, we provide sugar in the media, and that is the energy source that the plants use to grow.
So in terms of when you pick them up, in terms of getting them into your tank, is there any different process, or how should you go about it, whether it's a gel media or a liquid media? What's the best way to do that?
Well, basically, I recommend you either use some tap water that's around 24 degrees, or take a little bit of water out of your aquarium, put it in a tub or a bucket or a container, so that when you take the plant out, you can wash it all off. Because as I've said, it has sugar in the media. You want to get rid of as much of that as possible because you don't want sugar in your aquarium. It's a perfect source for not so much algae, but you get a whole lot of bacterial growth and things like that. If you don't wash it out properly, you put it into the aquarium, you could get a bacterial bloom that your tank just turns opaque.
I've definitely been guilty of getting a bit lazy, leaving some gel on and just planting it in, and it does make some algae sometimes, I think.
It does. And that's also the benefit of liquid culture. It's so much easier to wash off.
I mean, I've definitely got a few questions that, I've dabbled up quite a lot in plants and tissue culture and stuff, but sometimes I order too many, and then how should I be storing those? Because sometimes you see them in the fridge, sometimes you just see them hanging around. Should I put a light on them? Who knows?
Well, what I normally say with these is when they go out to the shops, they've normally got about 4 weeks worth of life in them.
Yeah, okay.
Because obviously your container of tissue culture obviously has the plant in it. It has either a gel or, in my case, a liquid media. In that contains sugar, water, and the nutrients for the plant to grow.
Okay.
So obviously the plant is consuming the sugar as its energy source. It's not photosynthesizing like happens in an aquarium. It has a limited life in there. And unfortunately, once you open it, you've lost the fact that it's sterile. And because you've got sugar in there, you will get mold and bacteria and everything, all the spores that are floating around in the air get on the sugar, and then you get things like that where you got yucky contamination. The bottom temperature I recommend is 20 degrees.
Yeah, okay.
They're going to run them into a fridge or a cool storage. But once again, the biggest thing is trying to keep them too long.
Yeah.
If you notice that the media is starting to go yellow or discoloured, it's then time to get them out. Get them out quick because they're probably running out of food and they will die.
Okay.
Things like your anubiuses you can get away with. I've had anubius in culture for more than 12 months in a jar. Same with some of the cryptocorynes. But most of the other plants, because they're fairly rapidly growing, they will suck up the nutrients, and once the nutrients are gone, the plant starts to die.
Yeah.
And then you're taking them out of the container, putting them into the aquarium. The plant's got to transition from not photosynthesizing to photosynthesizing and producing its own energy. If it hasn't got enough reserve energy to do that transition, it won't necessarily survive.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense, because I've definitely seen that yellow media and plants not doing so well, and often, now that I think about it, I've opened the container, used half of it, closed the container and sat it on the top of the aquarium, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, look, I can do it here in the lab because I can do it in a sterile environment. Sometimes I'll open a container and only use half the contents when I'm reculturing it and transferring it to, or multiplying it. Like I'll take a container of that and I'll get easy another 20 containers out of that by the time I divide it up. Now I might only use half or 3/4 of that, I can then seal it back up because I'm working in a sterile environment. But once again, as I said, at home, as soon as you open it up, all the contamination that's floating around in the air gets in there. It loves the sugar and it multiplies. In here, I keep the room at about 24.5 degrees C.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
The lights run for 16 hours a day and the humidity in here is around 50%.
Yep.
Keeps everything nice and stable.
Yeah, and that is one reason why I was asking about storing them, because I was expecting a cooler place. So that's interesting, but it makes sense.
Yeah, look, you can slow it down a little bit, but you're still going to get 3 to 4 weeks out of the container when it goes to the shop, or however you're getting it from the lab. You want to try and get it into your aquarium as quickly as you can.
So we were just talking, we're up in the office, I was checking out some of your tanks, but we were talking about what to look for when actually starting a new plant.
What part of the plant you're actually looking for to tissue culture. So in a stem plant like this, you're looking for that little bit there where the new leaf is starting to grow, or the very, very tip of the apex of the plant.
Okay.
Are your 2 points that you'll try to get going with that. And as I said, with your crypt, is your runner where you get the start of a new plant. That's what you're trying, that tiny little growth bud is the part that you're looking to use to try and start a new plant in tissue culture.
Yeah, that's something I never realized before. I thought, oh, can you just take a stem, cut it up, but really there's specific aspects that you
want what they call here is the atypical bud, or your little, once again, you'll get an atypical bud in there at the base of the leaves on these, where you get new plant growing. As you can see, there's just, I don't know if you can see that, there's a tiny little new leaf or new plant growing there, and that's how you get your runners and how your plants divide.
Okay. And that's how you started your Ludwigia Super Red that we were talking about before. Fantastic. Have you always been more into plants than fish necessarily?
Yes. Yeah, I have ever since I first got my first aquarium in about 87 or 88.
Yep.
I've always been into plants and learning how to have a planted aquarium. Back in those days, I was doing the sugar and yeast CO2 on a 6 by 18 by 14 tank.
Yeah, true. I guess we're pretty spoiled these days that we have access to, more of the things from across the world, like planted substrate and all sorts of good fertilizer and everything else, where you'd have to sort of figure it out from the ground up.
Lighting, the lighting we've got nowadays, CO2 systems, everything. Back then it was just so expensive.
Yeah. Now
you've got a massive variety of products, and a lot more aquascaping, a lot more people into it, and it's good to see that it's growing.
After seeing this, if people were really keen to get their hands on specifically your tissue culture plants, where's the best place to do that?
There's a variety of shops around stocking, or the other one is go into your local aquarium shop and have a discussion with them and say, contact me, and either do a specific order in of what you want, or for them to start stocking them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks heaps for having me today. I really appreciate your time.
Not a problem.